And one of the things that we were able to do was to talk about what it means to be on Ohlone territory. And in that way, there's a protocol that usually happens when folks come together. And one of the things that we talk about is before colonization, and I'll talk a little bit about this later in my talk, there was a time in our lives not too long ago when we were able to do protocol to people that came into our territory. Sometimes what happens is that people don't realize anymore, because you're able to just fly all over the world, that you're going onto somebody else's territory, and what that means, and what it means to ask permission to be on that land. Not just the permission of the people that are here with us, but the people, our ancestors before us, and those that are yet to come, and how you stand on that land and what the importance of that is. Today I have the honor to be sitting alongside two of my sister warriors, Laura and Alicia, and I want to honor them in the way that my ancestors would have a long time ago. When my ancestors would have invited people into our territory, we would have honored them with song and with laughter and with food and with gifts before we ever asked what their business was in our land. After all of that fun time, we would get around to the business. And so before we get to the business, I want to offer you these gifts. So I'm going to hold. So both of you guys stand up for me, please. So I have these gifts for you. This is medicine that was picked here. It's cedar and mugwort, and it helps us to center ourselves. If you burn this, it's a good way to just have good medicine around you. And this is in our language. It says, "Si'i uti isha," water is life. And this is in a design of one of my baskets that come from our ancestors. That's all the way in England, because we don't have our baskets here anymore. And so just wanted to offer you these, both these. And then in that way, we also offer these necklaces that have food on it and abalone. And it's the food that from this place here that we ate for many years. And so this is the food to feed and nourish your bodies and your spirits when you have time of heartache. So.
Thank you so much, Karina. That was really beautiful. Thank you for welcoming us into this space and for the gifts that you offer and share. Hi, everyone. I'm Dylan. I'm with Catalyst Project. And I am humbled to get to moderate our panel today and to get to share this space with these three incredible women. First, I just want to say again how grateful I am to each of you for your leadership in our movements, for the vision and possibilities that you offer when the systems of colonization can feel so overwhelming, for the spiritual encampments you have led, for the shutdowns you have led, for the ways that you embody resistance. And thank you so much for coming here to share some of your brilliance with us in this room. Thank you. In a time when what we are up against can feel so overwhelming, we truly believe that the struggles against colonization have some of the strongest visions for a path forward. So I first came into indigenous sovereignty work about a dozen years ago, and I've been deeply transformed by it. I've come to feel that for those of us who have not been colonized, understanding colonization and understanding the actual impacts of colonization, it's many, many layered. That we can feel like we get it at one level, and there's always a deeper level to understand it. That for those of us who have gotten to live a life where the impacts of colonizations have not landed directly on our bodies, that it's going to take a lifetime to really understand it. And that each time we get to be in spaces like this, we can get one more level down. So for the Anne Braden program, we always start off our first open sessions with one about colonization and resistance, because we know that understanding colonization both within the borders of what is now the US and outside of those borders is fundamental. It's fundamental to our analysis, and it needs to be fundamental to our strategies for how to get out of this. So thank you so much for helping us see these visions. And with that, let's get into it. So first we have Lara Kiswani. She is a Palestinian born in the Bay Area. She got her master's in education with an emphasis on equity and social justice, where her work focused on Arab youth, language, and culture. As a student organizer, she helped to establish the Middle East South Asia Studies program, co-founded Students for Justice in Palestine, and organized the Third World Forum at UC Davis. She has worked with youth. She's worked as a youth and adult educator, and is currently a member of Al Jator, a local Palestinian folkloric dance troupe. She is a lecturer at San Francisco State in the College of Ethnic Studies, and is the executive director of the Arab Resource and Organizing Center, AROC. I'll introduce everybody, and then we'll get everyone started in conversation. Slow down. Thank you. Thank you, translator. Alicia Rodríguez is a Puerto Rican independence fighter who was incarcerated for almost 19 and a half years as a political prisoner. She was born in Chicago in 1953, but living in the US did not protect her from racism and poverty. In the early 1970s, her first trip to Puerto Rico was a turning point in her life. She witnessed the devastating effects of industrial pollution and resolved to join the anti-colonial struggle. In 1980, Alicia and 10 other compañeras and compañeros were arrested and convicted of seditious conspiracy, the act of attempting to overthrow the government of the United States in Puerto Rico. She was sentenced to 85 years in prison. Alicia and other Puerto Rican political prisoners were released from prison on September 10th, 1999, after a victorious campaign of solidarity, forcing President Bill Clinton to grant clemency, but with conditions. She now lives in Puerto Rico. She has taught pottery making workshops in different cities in the United States and in Puerto Rico. And before the Puerto Rican economic crisis and Hurricane Maria's devastation, Alicia was teaching play classes in the town where she lives. Alicia Rodríguez.
Chingona de chingonas.
And last but definitely not least, we have Karina Ghouls. She is the spokesperson for the Confederated Villages of Lashawn Ohlone territories. She's an acclaimed speaker locally, nationally, and internationally on the work of sacred sites protection and preservation, as well as the invisibility of her peoples. She was born and raised in Oakland, California, the territory of Huichin, as she said. She's the co-founder and a lead organizer for Indian People Organizing for Change, a native-run grassroots organization that works on indigenous peoples' issues. In 2011, Karina and Janella LaRose, Wounded Knee DeCampo, and a committee of others joined together and put out a call for warriors to create a prayerful vigil in occupation of Segorate in Vallejo, California, an occupation that lasted for 109 days and set a precedent for future struggles to protect sacred sites. Her current work includes co-founding of a Native women-led urban land trust, the Segorate Land Trust. Karina Ghouls. So we would love to just hear from the three of you a bit about the struggles that you're a part of, how is colonization fundamental, and anything about your current work or work you've done.
I'm going first because I was told I was supposed to. Well, first I just want to say how humbled I am and honored to be on a panel with the both of you, and how grateful I am for Catalyst to couch and to start off the Anne Braden program in the public series with a conversation about colonialism. And for me, the fact that I'm sitting with the both of you and two movements and individuals who have been inspiring and helped shape my own understanding of colonialism and learning about the indigenous struggle of the Americas is how I began to really understand Palestine. And learning about Puerto Rico is how I continue to understand Palestine. So, you know, the topic today, colonialism and resistance, is pretty broad, and as I tried to understand where I should start, or what I should say, I thought, well, let me start with first explaining or sharing how it is I began to understand the colonization of my people of Palestine. I was born and raised here in the Bay Area, the first of my family to be born in the United States, and I was born and raised into a working class family, a family of immigrants. I was a young woman, a young girl growing up in the Bay Area, a Palestinian, in a school system that taught me time and time again that my people didn't exist. So when I would go to the classrooms, the teachers would say, Palestine doesn't exist, and they would point to Israel. And when I'd go home and hear the stories of my grandmother and my father, who would teach me my history, I began to understand the colonial project that is now known as Israel. The first history teachers in my lifetime were my grandmother and my father, who lived through what is known as the Nakba, the catastrophe of 1948, when Palestinians were dispossessed of their homes and homelands. My grandmother literally walked on foot to Gaza because her village was raided and massacred. Today, when I went back to Palestine last year and the year before, I went to go see her village, and no one could locate it, no one could find it because it no longer exists. It's now an Israeli city with a new name and an airport. But there are two homes that continue to stand there, which continue to remind people everywhere, and our people, that we existed and we exist, and that the land was stolen from us. So that's how I came to understand the colonial project of the State of Israel. And that's how I became to understand what colonialism was. And as soon as I grew into being an activist in my teens and early 20s, I began to understand my relationship to internationalism. I understood the struggle of Palestine as not a struggle for the Palestinian people, but as central to understanding US imperialism, central to understanding global repression, and central to challenging both of those things. I always say if Palestine were free today, tomorrow I'd be fighting for everyone else's struggles as well, and fighting to make sure the liberation of Palestine looks how we want it to look, right? So just briefly, I don't want to give a history lesson about Palestine. Hopefully people have known enough, but oftentimes the story of Palestine, the colonization of Palestine, is left untalked about. We're seen as only a human rights issue. When children are imprisoned, they should be freed because they're children. Or when people are massacred, we want to stop the massacre because people shouldn't be killed. But Palestine is not only a human rights issue. Palestine is an anti-colonial struggle. It's an anti-imperialist struggle. It's an anti-capitalist struggle. And I'm going to slow down. And so understanding that history is important, because if we only understand it as an individual struggle for human rights, we lose the collective nature and the systemic oppression and institutional oppression that has caused us to be here in the first place. Me, a Palestinian, and my family unable to return and live in our own homeland. Why, right? So it's indistinguishable from other colonial projects. As soon as I began to study history and colonialism, it's not very different than what happened here in North America. It's not very different than what continues to happen in Puerto Rico. It's not very different than what has happened in South Africa. You have colonial powers, European powers, promising a land that's not theirs to others, to settlers around the world. You have colonial powers, European powers, carving out nation states and distinguishing borders and boundaries that are arbitrary and not reflective of the indigeneity of the land. And therefore you have promises made to settlers around the world to settle in a land that's not theirs. That's the story of Palestine, not very different than any other colonial story. And so we have the European settler project known as the State of Israel, which is now a commitment and project of the United States that continues to shape the world in many ways because of the role of US imperialism and the role that Israel plays in continuing US imperialism. So that's my history lesson for you all, in case you still are confused. It is a colonial project, and it always has been a colonial project, but there's a reason why many people don't know that. There's a reason why that history is left out of history books, like all other histories of people that are oppressed. Those in power are committed to rewriting history and making sure that those who are fighting back on the ground and actually building power against state violence don't win, right? And so for that reason, it's criminal now to teach Palestine. You can get fired from universities, students can get arrested, student groups can be shut down, organizations like AROC can be criminalized and told they can't be working in public schools because we're anti-Zionist. This is how Zionism and US imperialism plays out. So while we have on the ground the ongoing colonial project of the State of Israel, confiscating more land, demolishing more homes as we speak, imprisoning more people and children like Ahid Tamimi as we speak, massacring people and developing and creating more colonies for settlers, Jewish settlers from around the world as we speak. We also have the ongoing colonial project of Israel playing out right here in the United States. So the arm of Israel here are nonprofits, NGOs, foundations, and Israeli lobby groups that make certain that we are stifled from organizing and doing work around Palestine, that make certain that we are criminalized when we organize around Palestine, that it is not allowed in academic circles and universities. So this is the arm of Israel here in the United States, and it's because the US-Israel partnership, the fact that Israel wouldn't even exist without United States money and political backing, and the fact that the United States learns from the tactics and strategies and technologies of the State of Israel to bring them here and employ them on the ground against Black and brown communities right here in the United States. There's mutual interest in maintaining that hegemony, and likewise, there's mutual interest in our world, in our movements, right, to learn from each other and struggle with one another and center anti-racism and anti-Zionism, so that there's a term called progressive except for Palestine. How many of you guys have heard of that term? I don't like acronyms, and it's called PEP. And so I never really took it seriously, but ultimately it's a very serious thing. There is something known as progressive except for Palestine in the United States. You could have good politics on just about everything. Immigrant rights, you could have good politics on capitalism. But when it comes to Palestine, you're not allowed to touch it. When it comes to Palestine, it's told that it doesn't matter, it's not included. And it's our struggles, the Puerto Rican struggle, the indigenous struggle, the Palestinian struggles that make those connections and make it clear that no, you cannot choose one struggle over the other, and you cannot undermine an ongoing anti-colonial struggle on the ground from being mentioned and talked about and included, dismissing the fact that they are suffering because of the United States, right? And so when we talk about resistance and repression, which I tried to just cover, it's also important to talk about what is it that we're fighting for when we talk about the liberation of Palestine. People get so caught up in the capital, is it Jerusalem or not, or is it two-state or one state, and Ultimately, for us, it's an anti-Zionist struggle. It's an anti-capitalist struggle. It's an anti-imperialist struggle. We want one place for all people, pluralistic, democratic, that enables people to live in their dignity, regardless of race or religion, that acknowledges the right of return of all the 7.5 million Palestinian refugees that are not allowed to return, that acknowledges the people in prison that should all be freed, and that also fights for the people's power to live the way they want to live, where they want to live, how they want to live, free of exploitation and racism. And that's what we fight for in Palestine, and I would like to think that we fight for that everywhere, and that we need to continue to center these types of struggles that are an exception in this country because of the power of the United States and Israel. And when they exceptionalize something, that's a lesson for us to learn. Why are they exceptionalizing it, and how are we going to center it? Because that should be our compass. That should be our moral compass when it comes to how we decide and how we move. Thank you.